The lymphatic system is designed to drain fluid from our tissues and return it to the blood. It also contributes to our body defenses. There are two major components to the lymphatic system. One is the lymphatic vessels. These are going to transport escaped fluids back to the blood. The lymphoid organs and tissues house the immune cells. These cells are phagocytic cells like neutrophils and monocytes and lymphocytes. Some of the lymphoid organs filter the lymph before it goes back into the venous blood supply. The lymphatic vessels help drain fluid from the tissues that's left behind after nutrient exchange. Hydrostatic pressure in the capillary beds force fluid out of the blood at the beginning of the capillary bed to wash it through the tissues. This fluid will contain nutrients and oxygen, and as it washes across the tissues, we exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide, nutrients, and waste products. Most of this fluid returns back to the capillary bed at the venous end of the capillary bed, but some of it is left in the tissue. This becomes what is called interstitial fluid. This fluid must be returned to the blood. We need to keep our blood volume constant, and we also want to prevent edema or fluid swelling in the tissues. The interstitial fluid becomes the lymph. This is the fluid that's picked up by the lymphatic capillaries. During capillary exchange, blood enters the capillary beds. Fluid is forced into the tissues on the arterial end of the capillary bed, and this fluid washes across the tissues so that nutrients can be taken to cells, waste products picked up, oxygen delivered, carbon dioxide picked up. As we move to the venous end, most of this fluid returns back to the capillary bed, but not all of it. The lymphatic capillaries are a network of capillaries that are interwoven in the capillary bed between the tissue cells and the capillaries. They pick up the lymph, that's the fluid that's left behind by the capillary exchange. The lymphatic capillaries are very permeable. They're a single layer of endothelial cells that overlap, and they make these little flaps. The collagen fibers help attach the flaps to the tissue. As fluid builds up in the tissue, it pushes these little flaps open. Fluid then moves into the capillaries and will close when the capillaries are full. Because these openings are quite large, not only does fluid get into the capillaries, but also cellular debris, abnormal cells, bacteria, viruses, anything that might be out there in the tissues. The lymphatic vessels collect lymph from the lymphatic capillaries. These vessels are very much like veins. They have very thin walls. The larger vessels have valves, just like the veins. The lymphatic vessels do not have a pump associated with them, but they do have very low pressure, and this helps return the lymph back to the blood. Because the lymphatic vessels are surrounded by muscles, when muscles contract, this helps force fluid along the tubing. Also, breathing aids in the transport of the fluids. In the larger vessels, there are some smooth muscle. This smooth muscle is capable of contracting and moving fluid through the vessels. Lymph nodes are filtration units. These are clustered along the lymphatic vessels. While we have lymph nodes clustered several places, there are particularly large clusters in the inguinal area, the axillary area, and the cervical region. As the lymph travels through the lymph nodes, specialized cells can remove the foreign material. Bacteria and tumor cells, for example, can be removed by the cells that are housed in the lymph nodes. The lymph nodes house your immune cells. These are the macrophages, which are phagocytic and can destroy bacteria and viruses, as well as the lymphocytes. When the lymphocytes encounter their particular antigen, they can produce antibodies and fight viruses. If the lymph nodes are involved in actively fighting off an infection, they will swell. This is because of the cellular activity. The lymph nodes are clusters of tissue that are surrounded by a fibrous capsule. Reticular connective tissue forms the interior. Reticular tissue makes sort of a network, so the phagocytic cells and the lymphocytes can hang out in this network. There are more incoming vessels, afferent vessels, than there are outgoing vessels. This means that there's a little bit of pressure behind that fluid as it goes through the lymph node. This allows the phagocytes and the lymphocytes an opportunity to see everything that's in this lymph. Fluid will enter the lymphatic capillaries. The lymphatic capillaries will then empty into lymphatic collecting ducts. These are where the lymph nodes are located. The lymphatic collecting ducts empty into one of two lymphatic ducts. The right lymphatic duct will drain lymph from the upper right 1/4 of the body. The left lymphatic duct will drain all of the rest of the body, the other 3/4 of the body. The right and left lymphatic ducts empty into the subclavian veins, very close to the heart. This is how the lymph gets back to the blood. So the lymphatic capillaries feed into the lymphatic collecting vessels. These are the ones that will go through the lymph nodes. The lymphatic collecting vessels will then empty into the lymphatic ducts. We have the right lymphatic duct that will drain 1/4 of the body, and the left lymphatic duct drains 3/4 of the body. It is frequently referred to as the thoracic duct. The ducts will then empty into the venous system, so the fluid that was left behind in the tissues gets filtered and returns back to the blood. Swollen lymph nodes are referred to as buboes. When the lymph nodes are overwhelmed by large numbers of bacteria or viruses, they become infected. That's what a bubo is. This causes inflammation in the lymph node as well as tenderness and swelling. Sometimes the lymph nodes act as secondary cancer sites. Cancer cells do not stick well to each other. When they break free, they can get into the lymphatic system. They will then take up housekeeping in the lymphatic nodes sometimes, and from there they can spread to other organs. Besides the lymph nodes, there are some other lymphoid organs. The spleen filters blood, not lymph. It helps remove bacteria, viruses, and debris that may be in the blood. The spleen also destroys old, worn-out red blood cells and acts as a blood reservoir. The thymus is a large gland that's located in the mediastinum. It is particularly active during childhood. The thymus functions in the development of the T lymphocytes, which is part of the specific immune system. We also have clusters of tissues known as the mucosa-associated lymphatic tissues, or the MALT. These help protect the upper respiratory system and the digestive system. The tonsils are small masses of tissue that ring the throat. They help trap pathogens that may be entering the body via the throat. Tonsillitis occurs when the tonsils become overwhelmed with bacteria. They become red and swollen and sometimes have to be removed. Peyer's patches are small clusters of MALT tissue that are found in the walls of the small intestine. The small intestine has a very diverse bacterial population and is very absorptive. It would be easy for bacteria to enter the bloodstream from the digestive system. Peyer's patches help prevent this from happening. Here we see the other lymphoid organs, the tonsils, ringing the pharynx. Here's the thymus and the mediastinum, the spleen over here on the left side of the body, and then Peyer's patches, those little clusters of MALT tissue scattered all throughout the digestive system. Immunity is the protection of the body from foreign substances. Now, all cells contain cellular markers. These are usually proteins. They help give the cell its identity, and it helps the cell communicate with other cells. Epithelial cells know they're epithelial cells because of the cellular markers on them. Cellular markers are unique to each individual. No two people have exactly the same cell markers unless they're identical twins. Antigens are cell surface molecules that can stimulate an immune response. Self-antigens are those that are normal cell markers for that individual. Not self-antigens are any antigens that would be foreign to the individual. They might be normal in another individual, but they are not normal in that individual. When foreign material stimulates the immune system to produce antibodies, we say we have had an immune response. Antibodies are simply molecules that react with the antigen, that is, with the foreign substance on another cell. Antibodies will then attach to the antigen and somehow inactivate the antigen. Some molecules are what we call haptens. These are incomplete antigens. They have the right shape to irritate the immune system, but they're not large enough. They have to bind to another molecule in order to elicit an immune response. Haptens are frequently involved in inappropriate immune responses. Allergies. Penicillin, for example, is a hapten. If you happen to have the protein that will attach to penicillin, it can become antigenic, and then you have an allergy to penicillin. The body's defense system can be divided into 3 lines of defense. The first line are the barriers of the body. The second line are certain cells and internal chemicals of the body. And the third line are specific cells that are produced against specific antigens. The first and second line of defense are nonspecific. We say they're innate. Everyone has the same tools in their toolbox. The third line of defense is specific. We sometimes refer to this as your adaptive immune system because this will be unique for each individual. What you have in this line of defense will depend on what immune challenges you have met. The nonspecific defense mechanisms: your first line of defense, skin, mucous membranes. Second line of defense, various cells and processes. Everyone has all of these. Your third line of defense, your specific defense mechanisms. This is when your immune system comes into play. Here you will develop a group of lymphocytes that will be able to produce antibodies against very specific antigens. Your first line of defense is your intact skin and mucous membranes. These provide both a physical and a chemical barrier. Certainly as long as your skin and mucous membranes are intact, nothing can penetrate them. But both manufacture secretions that help protect you further from bacterial invasion. In your stomach, you have hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes. There are also enzymes in your saliva and tears that help damage bacteria. Sebum, your skin oil, is actually toxic to certain bacteria. The mucus produced on the mucous membranes acts to trap bacteria. And then many cells that are near the openings to your body have cilia. These help bring the mucus to natural openings so that bacteria-laden mucus can be gotten rid of. Again, everyone has these characteristics. So this is a non-specific immunity that is innate. Everyone is born with it. Your second line of defense comes into play if the first line is breached. This is a group of cells like phagocytes and natural killer cells and a cluster of chemicals and various processes that help protect you from invading organisms. These chemicals and processes would be things like the inflammatory response, complement, interferon, and fever. These two are nonspecific and innate. Everyone has the capability of doing these. As a second line of defense, you have two types of cells, phagocytes and natural killer cells. Phagocytes may be macrophages, these are monocytes, and neutrophils. Both of these circulate in the blood, but both are able to leave and enter tissues if necessary. As phagocytes, they engulf foreign substances, this is the process of phagocytosis, and then they digest the ingested material. This will render it harmless. Natural killer cells are a type of lymphocyte. These lymphocytes will recognize any non-self protein and they will destroy it. Natural killer cells are particularly good at identifying and destroying cancer cells. Inflammation is another part of your second line of defense. It's a nonspecific response to tissue damage. The cardinal signs are redness, heat, swelling, and pain in the area of the inflammation. Inflammation comes about because injured cells release a group of chemicals. Histamine is the primary chemical, but there is another group of chemicals known as kinins. These chemicals start the inflammation process. Histamine in particular causes blood vessels to dilate. As they do, the spaces between the cells become larger, so the blood vessels become more permeable and leak more fluid into the surrounding tissues. Phagocytic cells are called to the area. Some of the kinins act as chemotactic factors. Bringing cells to an area and having them stay is chemotaxis. Once the phagocytes are there, they can engulf any material. They clean up cellular debris and engulf any foreign material and destroy it. This all sets the stage for repair. Your nonspecific chemical defenses in the second line of defense include complement and interferon. Complement is a group of 20 proteins that circulate in your blood. When activated, they form what's called a membrane attack complex. This membrane attack complex will punch a hole in the cell membrane that started the whole process. This will cause the cell to lyse. Also, complement factors can enhance phagocytosis. Interferon is produced by virally infected cells. This material will then diffuse to nearby cells that are not yet infected by the virus. Interferon will cause the production of a substance in the uninfected cell that will prevent the virus from being able to damage that cell. Fever is another part of your second line of defense. This is a nonspecific response to pyrogens. Pyrogens are simply substances that are secreted by bacterial cells, your damaged cells, white blood cells. Pyrogens will go to the hypothalamus, where your body's control center is for temperature, and reset the temperature control. This will cause the body temperature to increase. Mild to moderate fever will help remove iron and zinc from circulation. These are two substances that are necessary for microbes to be able to grow at an unlimited rate. So removing these from your system will slow down microbial growth. It won't kill anything, but it will help keep the numbers smaller. Also, fever increases cellular metabolism. This means your phagocytic cells move a little faster. All of your immune processes just occur at a slightly higher rate. And additionally, it makes you feel bad, so you rest, which is something you need to do if you're sick. However, high fevers can be dangerous. High fevers can inactivate proteins. These are the enzymes that mediate your cellular processes. If enough of these are damaged, metabolic processes will shut down.